In this video, we'll see what offended Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy that subsequently led to this overreaction.
We'll just reverse it on you. Let's see if you like it. You just wanted to sin, and so then you use your arguments against Christianity to justify you leaving the faith. I really wanted to believe, but then I studied and I just couldn't believe it because I was just so reasonable and passionate about truth that I just had to leave. And then he's like, well, you Christians, you just believe because you wanna, and you find the evidence you need, but not like me. I just followed the evidence because I'm super, super reasonable and awesome in that way.
Man, you're on one today, man.
Well, I mean, I'm just letting them know how I feel. And if they want to fight me, come on the channel and talk to me directly.
A little over a week ago, Alex O'Connor posted another interview with former Christian Rhett McLaughlin. The first interview they conducted many months ago significantly resonated with me because that interview covered how Rhett deconverted from Christianity, and his deconversion was quite similar to my own trajectory of leaving the Christian faith. Nevertheless, the new interview with Alex and Rhett centered around the advice that Rhett has for Christians to be better and more intellectually honest Christians.
But I think we can both agree that there are certain ways that Christianity expresses itself in the modern world and throughout history that probably need rethinking, right?
I've seen the way that Christians have approached a lot of things, and I kind of realized that I had sort of developed some ideas about, I've got advice for Christians ultimately, I think is what it is. Like, if you've got people like me who are currently in the flock, and you want to keep them there, I think there's some things that you could do differently, right?
Now, my aim in this video is not to address the advice that Rhett articulated with Alex here. Rather, my aim is to survey the irrational reaction that Inspiring Philosophy had to Alex and Rhett's interview, because I think that Michael and Than betrayed a sense of irrationality and poor argumentation when it came to something specific that Rhett articulated. To see where this is going, survey what Michael and Than expressed regarding their overall feelings related to Alex and Rhett's interview.
And let me be clear. This was not intentional. I'm 90% sure Alex and Rhett were not trying to be intentional. But the interview they put out was just filled with intellectual snobbery. It was very demeaning. It came across as very arrogant. I don't think it was intentional. Let me just reiterate that again. I don't think they intended this. But the whole interview of how they're going to fix Christianity, as you'll see, really came across as quite rude, looking down on Christians, being very demeaning. I was listening to the first 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, this should be interesting. And then as it goes on, by like the 20-minute marker, the 30-minute marker, I was getting more and more angry at like how rude they were being.
Now, there was one clip in particular from Alex and Rhett's interview that really seemed to rub Michael and Than the wrong way. This is one of the main clips that Michael and Than labeled as condescending, rude, and demeaning.
It has only until a very recent point in history, if I were to share the gospel with you and tell you about the risen Jesus, would you have said, well, let me see if I can verify if that's true. Because you wouldn't have had any tools to verify that was true.
Yeah.
Like there was no scholarship on that anyone had access to. So if that's such an important part, like reasoning your way to that is such an important part of the process, then why is it that those tools have never been made available until very recently? And by the way, now that the apologetics tools are available, the small minority of Christians take advantage of it. Like, think about it. Like, I saw a lot of people come to know Jesus during my time in ministry, and I never, not once, after sharing the gospel, did I have someone say, do you have any way to prove that that's true? Can we, like, is there something I can read to know that the Bible is true? It was like, no, it was a faith decision. It was a spiritual decision. And then maybe once they became a Christian, they might then go to apologetics, which again, that's what apologetics exists for.
Yeah.
Is to justify belief that's already happened in a lot of ways.
We'll survey Michael and Than's overreaction to this clip in just a second. I first want to highlight the points that Rhett is articulating here because I believe that his convictions are intriguing and overall correct. First, Rhett is making the case that it's only been until fairly recently that Christians could take up the task of actually historically verifying that Christianity is true. Before the Enlightenment, there was largely no way to empirically verify Christianity or parts of the Bible through biblical scholarship or archaeology, especially since those disciplines didn't even exist. So Rhett's point is that most Christians through history have believed primarily on faith, with little regard to actually determining whether or not it's true, because they had no means to do so. And Rhett provides another important insight when he articulates that even today, with all the apologetics resources that Christians have at hand, only a very small fraction of Christians even bother to utilize those resources in order to attempt to verify what they believe. This is actually an incredibly insightful point on Rhett's part. Now, the second point that Rhett made in that clip, and the one that seems to have significantly agitated Michael and Than, was Rhett's claim that apologetics is largely only employed or sought out after one has already come to the faith. That is, most Christians who survey apologetics do so not prior to converting to Christianity, but after they've already been convinced of the truth of Christianity through non-intellectual means. So Rhett's essentially saying that Christians who survey apologetics are not doing so in order to follow the evidence where it leads, but rather only to find justification after the fact for what they've already committed themselves to believe. Now here's where we survey Michael and Than's overreaction to Rhett's sentiments.
It was like, no, it was a faith decision. It was a spiritual decision. And then maybe once they became a Christian, they might then go to apologetics, which again, that's what apologetics exists for.
Yeah.
It's to justify belief that's already happened in a lot of ways.
It's to justify belief that has already happened in a lot of ways. Okay.
Did they not realize they were apologists too?
Well, hold up. Let's just follow that logic. Okay, Rhett, guess what? That's all you've done. We'll just reverse it on you. Let's see if you like it. You just wanted to sin, and so then you use your arguments against Christianity to justify you leaving the faith. That's really what happened. Because just like apologetics is just for us to justify our beliefs that we already have, you went through this deconstruction process and you really wanted to sin and be a part of the in crowd in California that were not Christian. So you found the arguments to justify that. Does that sound charitable or nice? Or does it sound demeaning and rude? Like I'm talking down to you. That's how you sound to us.
I remember specifically, actually, when Rhett went through his deconstruction phase, hearing about it and him talking about how it was very annoying that people were actually saying that to him, by the way. So he knows. He's heard that before, and he did not like it then, at least from what I remember. And he shouldn't. But like, why are you projecting that onto apologists now? Weird.
Yeah. So if all we do is we use reason to justify beliefs we want to have or already have, how do you not know that's not what you're doing? And why can't we say the same thing to you? You just wanted to sin, so you left the faith and you found the arguments you needed to justify that, to justify your hedonistic lifestyle. Does that not sound demeaning and rude? Because it is. Great. Why do you get to do it in reverse?
Yeah.
Like, this is where I was on my bike riding around the park. I actually stopped my bike, pulled out my phone, put this time marker down and wrote that to make sure I remembered, because I was like, yep, there it is. There's the double standard right there. Because what we saw with Rhett last time, it was when he was on Alex, it was like, I really wanted to believe, but then I studied and I just couldn't believe it because I was just so reasonable and passionate about truth that I just had to leave. And then he's like, well, you Christians, you just believe because you wanna, and you find the evidence you need, but not like me. I just followed the evidence because I'm super, super reasonable and awesome in that way.
Man, you're on one today, man.
Well, I mean, I'm just letting them know how I feel. And if they want to fight me, come on the channel and talk to me directly.
Now, one crucial thing to note here is that Michael and Than didn't construct a single argument against what Rhett articulated. Not a single one. Michael merely ranted for a few minutes regarding the fact that he believed Rhett's claims were demeaning and rude. But even if that were true, Michael and Than weren't able to intellectually push back against anything Rhett explicated. And I think I know why. Because what Rhett said, is true. In fact, I think we can demonstrate this quite easily. We know for a fact that most individuals come to the faith through their upbringing. Most Christians are Christians because they were born into Christian families and raised in a Christian culture. Their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and grandparents, etc., are Christians. They attended church since they were children. They were taught about the stories in Genesis and Exodus around the same time they were taught their times tables. Christian indoctrination usually begins to take place before an individual develops the intellectual maturity to question or verify what they're being taught. This is just a fact. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not promulgating a crusade here against religious indoctrination. That's another video for another time. My point is rather just to elucidate facts that everybody should recognize. Religious belief, especially in Western Christianity, generally takes place extremely early on in a person's life. And once one accepts this fact, Rhett's point is quite inescapable. Someone raised as a Christian from very early on isn't going to comprehend the first thing about apologetics or rational justification of their religious beliefs until much, much later than when they first began to believe. This means that, just as a matter of chronological fact, interest in apologetics generally comes after one already has their religious beliefs firmly in place. And look, I for one can personally vouch for Rhett's sentiment. When I was a Christian and began studying apologetics, I didn't do so in an attempt to survey objective truth, and wherever the evidence happened to lean, I would subsequently lean that way. No, I began surveying apologetics because I wanted to intellectually justify the beliefs that I had already come to believe non-intellectually. I had already found my conclusion, and now I just needed to find the premises that justified that conclusion. I had already made my inference, and now I just needed to determine how the facts fit together to ground this inference. Now, I know that there's some watching this video who know of a counterexample to what's being claimed by Rhett and myself. That is, maybe you know of someone, or maybe you yourself came to believe in Christianity not through childhood or cultural indoctrination, but rather through an intellectual survey of the evidence of Christianity when you were an adult. Something akin to Lee Strobel's journey, for instance. And yeah, fair enough, I acknowledge that these cases do happen. They appear to be much less frequent, but they happen. But this is an exception to the rule. Most believers come to the faith through childhood and cultural indoctrination, and only after the fact become interested in surveying the evidence for what they believe. Again, this is simply a fact. Pew Research indicates, for example, that 70% of Protestants still hold to the same Christian religion they were raised in. And contrary to Michael and Than, it's not condescending or rude or demeaning to point this out. And if Michael and Than actually had an argument against these facts, they would present that argument as opposed to merely using rhetoric against Rhett's demeanor when presenting his facts. Michael and Than's only retort to what Rhett articulated was to claim that a similar argument could be leveled against him. That is, if Rhett can psychoanalyze Christians by asserting that they only use apologetics as an after-the-fact justification for belief that has already taken place, then Michael and Than can turn the tables on Rhett and other former believers and psychoanalyze them by asserting that they only leave the Christian faith because they want to sin. Again, notice that this isn't actually an argument. It's just a ploy that attempts to deter non-believers like Rhett from making his argument. But even if Michael and Than were correct, they're not, as we'll see in a moment, but even if they were, this wouldn't negate Rhett's point. It would simply entail that both Christians and non-believers are irrational in their belief formation. A negative-sum game, as it were. So even if we granted Michael and Than their reactionary point, they would still fail to render anything Rhett expressed as false or invalid. But Michael and Than's double-standard retort doesn't work. Why not? Well, because when non-believers like Rhett and myself deconverted, we did so while still desperately holding on to our religious beliefs as long as we could, while simultaneously resisting the secular beliefs that we would eventually come to hold. That is to say, we didn't first believe in secularism and then ipso facto try to subsequently find justification for this belief. No, most of us surveyed the evidence, and through months and years of intellectual and emotional turmoil, and contrary to what we desired, we eventually came to believe that the evidence pointed away from our sacred Christian dogmas. Now, of course, I'm not claiming that mine and Rhett's deconversion process is identical to all non-believers who are former Christians, but it does seem to be a very common trajectory. So then, Michael's constructed double standard simply doesn't work. We don't need to psychoanalyze believers in order to know that religious belief tends to precede apologetics and intellectual deduction, whereas Michael would need to uncharitably psychoanalyze non-believers in order to hold that their non-belief precedes a survey of the evidence. So again, Michael's point is simply not applicable. Now, it's also important to be fair to Michael and Than here and note that they weren't actually claiming to psychoanalyze non-believers in this way. They were merely attempting to make the point that if Rhett is going to uncharitably and rudely psychoanalyze believers, then they can do the same to him. So Michael and Than were simply giving Rhett a taste of his own medicine, so to speak. Nevertheless, I think we've seen that Michael and Than have done no such thing. Not only does their constructed double standard not work, but Michael significantly overreacted to Rhett's point. And as we've surveyed already, Michael and Than gave no actual refutation to counter Rhett's pertinent argument. Michael and Than are usually better equipped to bring counter-arguments against non-believers. But this time, they had nothing of substance to bring forth. They got caught in their feelings, didn't address the facts, and had no argumentative substance to level against Rhett or Alex. This seems to be a case where Michael and Than were not philosophical, nor were they inspiring. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe.